Imagen de Dios, beautifully human.
Usually when we talk about fixing a broken system, whether it's like a failing corporation, a struggling community, or even just a personal crisis, there is this built-in expectation of a clear mechanical roadmap.
Right, yeah. Like a checklist.
Exactly. You fire the bad management, you restructure the debt, and the analysts point to a spreadsheet and they say, there it is, that's the fix. Just follow these 10 steps and you're back in the black.
It's a very comforting way to view the world, honestly. I mean, we want our crises to have logical, step-by-step solutions that we can control. We really prefer things to be highly visible and, neatly categorized.
Oh, absolutely. But then you step into the world of ancient prophetic literature, specifically looking at total systemic collapse and restoration, and suddenly that spreadsheet is completely useless.
It's just out the window.
Totally out the window. We are looking at a landscape of crisis management that is wild, murky, and deeply unsettling. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking you on a journey through a fascinating piece of ancient text that functions like an absolute masterclass in reputation repair, catastrophic failure, and total systemic overhaul.
It really is a masterclass.
Today, our source material is a direct examination of Ezekiel 36. This is an ancient prophetic text directed at the nation of Israel, and it is just this brutal, beautiful narrative of ruin and restoration.
Yeah, and it's a text that fundamentally redefines how we understand the mechanics of rescue. It does not pull its punches about the depth of the failure, not at all. And it offers a solution that completely bypasses our normal human expectations of merit and reward.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this cycle. We are going to explore the devastating failure that kicks this off, a genuinely shocking motivation for God's rescue mission, and a radical internal upgrade that ultimately turns a desolate wasteland into a metaphorical Garden of Eden.
It's quite the journey.
It is. But before we get to that glorious restoration, the text demands that we stand right in the middle of the crime scene. And bizarrely, the text starts by talking directly to the dirt and the rocks. God tells the prophet, "Son of man, prophesy to the mountains of Israel."
He is literally addressing the physical geography.
Yeah.
The hills, the ravines, the desolate ruins.
Okay, let's unpack this, because why prophesy to a mountain?
Well,
I mean, the text explains that these mountains have become the possession of the surrounding nations. It specifically calls out Edom, saying these enemies claim the ancient heights with glee and malice, treating the land as their own personal piggy bank to plunder.
yeah, they're just exploiting it entirely.
Right. And the taunt from these enemies is incredibly visceral. They are standing on the hill saying, the land devours people and deprives your nation of its children. It's like watching a hostile corporate takeover of a bankrupt company, where the rival CEOs are literally dancing on the boardroom table, just popping champagne over the ruins of your life's work.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
But I still don't understand the focus on the real estate. Like, why is the divine grievance addressed to the geography instead of the people?
So, to understand that, we really have to completely shift our modern perspective on property. In the ancient mind, physical land wasn't just real estate. It wasn't an inert backdrop where human history just happened to take place.
Okay.
The land was actually an active participant in the covenant between God and the people. The text explicitly states the cause of this exile. The people had shed blood and defiled the land with their idols.
And because the land belongs to a holy God, it can't tolerate that corruption.
Exactly. It absorbs the injustice until it literally cannot hold the people anymore.
It's funny, when we look at ancient idols and bloodshed, it feels so distant. But if we think about the structural pillars of our own society today, what people sometimes call the 8 mountains of power, family, religion, government, media, education, entertainment, healthcare, and the economy.
Right, the core systems of society.
Yeah. And regardless of your political views, you just have to look at the news to see how those mountains are defiled by our own modern versions of idolatry and greed. We're talking about corrupting the system through hoarding stocks, manipulating oil blocks, hoarding real estate, gold, silver, or even exploiting people during global pandemics. It's the same systemic rot.
It is the exact same fundamental corruption,
Yeah.
just different terminology.
Hmm.
And the ancient text uses a really jarring metaphor for this pollution. It compares the defilement of the land to the impurity of a woman's monthly uncleanness.
Wait, I have to stop here because to a modern listener, that just sounds bizarre, arbitrary, and honestly deeply offensive. What is actually going on with that language?
That is a crucial question, and it requires us to look at ancient Near Eastern purity codes without our modern baggage.
Hmm.
In their worldview, ritual impurity had absolutely nothing to do with something being, dirty or sinful in a moral
It
sense.
wasn't about morality.
Not at all. It was about the strict boundary between life and death. God is the ultimate source of absolute overflowing life. Therefore, anything associated with the loss of life, or mortality, was fundamentally incompatible with the physical presence of the holy.
Oh, I see. So blood represents a loss of life force.
Precisely. A woman's cycle, a skin disease, touching a corpse. These were all natural, unavoidable human realities tied to our mortality. You just couldn't bring that state of mortality into the temple, which was the epicenter of life.
Okay, that makes so much more sense.
Right. Now take that concept and apply it morally. When the Israelites shed innocent blood through injustice, or when they sacrificed to lifeless idols, or as you mentioned, when modern systems exploit the vulnerable for financial gain, they were introducing ultimate violent mortality into the sacred space.
They were basically forcing death into the realm of life.
Yes, the environment itself became fatally polluted by their behavior. So the land, seeking to maintain its holiness, essentially vomits them out. God disperses them because the physical space is completely corrupted by their bloodshed.
Wow. So they lost everything and were scattered across the known world. But that dispersion created a massive unintended consequence, didn't it? The exile didn't just ruin the Israelites economically and politically. It created a global PR crisis for the divine.
Oh, a theological public relations disaster on a scale that is really hard for us to overstate.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we think of a classic redemption story, we expect the heroes to hit rock bottom, see the error of their ways, do the hard work of apologizing, and, slowly earn their way back into favor. We love a good montage of self-improvement.
Everyone loves a comeback story where the hero earns it.
Exactly. But the text says something completely different. It says that wherever the Israelites went in their exile, they profaned God's holy name. The surrounding nations were mocking them, looking at these refugees and saying, "These are the Lord's people," and yet they had to leave his land.
It was the ultimate geopolitical insult.
And God's response to this mockery is explicit and honestly a little offensive to human pride. He says, "It is not for your sake, people of Israel, that I am going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name."
Yeah, it's very blunt.
Wait, I have to push back on this. So the text is telling us God is launching this massive, miraculous restoration just to save face. It has nothing to do with the people earning it or repenting or even asking for help. He's just worried about his reputation.
I mean, it sounds incredibly self-centered until you understand the geopolitical theology of the ancient Near East. In that world, a nation's military and economic strength was viewed as a direct reflection of the power of their national deity.
Okay.
If your nation was conquered, if your people were dragged off in chains by the Babylonians, the global assumption was not, oh, their God is highly moral and is punishing them for violating ethical covenantal laws.
The assumption was simply their God lost the fight.
Exactly. Yeah. Their God is weak. He got beaten by the Babylonian gods. So when the Israelites are scattered, living as refugees, the surrounding nations look at them and say, look at these pathetic people. Their God couldn't even protect his own real estate.
So the people's justifiable exile for their own crimes had the side effect of making God look entirely powerless to the rest of the world.
Yes. His reputation is being dragged through the mud because the nations misunderstand the nature of the exile. They think it's weakness, not divine justice.
So he has to act.
Right. And so the restoration that Ezekiel prophesies cannot be a reward for good behavior because there is no good behavior to reward. The people are still actively profaning his name just by existing as conquered refugees.
Wow.
The rescue mission is a radical, undeniable demonstration of divine sovereignty. God is essentially saying, I have concern for my holy name. I am acting to prove that I am holy and powerful before the literal eyes of the nations. He is correcting a theological misunderstanding on a global scale.
He's basically telling the surrounding nations, I didn't lose. I evicted them because of their corruption. And now I am bringing them back, not because they deserve it, but to show the world exactly who is in charge of human history.
It is an entirely unmerited rescue mission. The driving engine of their salvation is God's commitment to his own character, not their performance.
That completely flips the script on how we usually view success, failure, and restoration. It takes human ego entirely out of the equation. But if we follow the logic here, that creates a massive problem.
How so?
Well, if this grand rescue mission is purely to prove a point to the neighbors, to repair this divine PR crisis, how does God ensure the exact same failure doesn't happen again? Like, if they polluted the land the first time with their bloodshed and idols, won't they just trash the real estate the moment they get the keys back?
That is the exact dilemma. You cannot simply put the same flawed tenants back into a renovated house and expect a different outcome. And this is why the text pivots so dramatically from a geographical solution to a deeply anatomical one.
Okay, this brings us to the internal upgrade. The text shifts from these sweeping geopolitical statements to something incredibly intimate. God says he's going to gather the people from all countries. Then he says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols.
Yeah.
We need to pause there. What are the mechanics of this clean water? Like, what does that mean?
So you have to remember that Ezekiel was a priest. His entire framework for understanding the world was built around the temple and its rituals. Sprinkling clean water is a deeply priestly action.
Okay, so it's a ritual cleansing.
Right. In the ancient rituals, water mixed with the ashes of a sacrifice was sprinkled on someone who had come into contact with death to purify them so they could re-enter the community. God is using that imagery to say, I am going to unilaterally wash away the stench of death and corruption you brought upon yourselves. It is an act of total unearned forgiveness.
But forgiveness only deals with the past, right? It doesn't fix the future, which is why the text goes deeper. God says, I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And he promises to put a new spirit, his spirit within them, to actually move them to follow his decrees.
Exactly.
It's like God realizes that cleaning up the house and even watching the tenants just isn't enough if their fundamental nature is still destructive. He doesn't just rewrite the external rule book, he updates their internal operating system.
I love that phrasing. The metaphor of the heart of stone is profoundly accurate. In ancient Hebrew thought, the heart wasn't just the seat of romantic emotion like we think of it today. It was the absolute center of human will, intellect, and decision-making.
The control center.
Right. A heart of stone represents a stubborn, unyielding human nature. It is cold. It is dead. It is the exact nature that led to the initial bloodshed and the systemic corruption of their society, and of those 8 mountains of power we talked about earlier.
I need to challenge this, though. If God just reaches in, rips out their human will, and replaces it with his own spirit to move them to follow his decrees, doesn't that fundamentally remove their free will? Are they just obedient robots now, walking around a restored land because they're programmed to?
It's a brilliant question, but it assumes that a heart of stone is a state of freedom. The text argues the exact opposite. A heart of stone is a state of slavery.
Really? Slavery to what?
When your heart is stone, you are entirely captive to your own destructive impulses, your greed, your ego, and your idols. You are locked in a cycle of behavior that inevitably leads to death and exile. External laws, rules, and regulations completely fail to constrain a heart of stone.
Right, because you can pass all the anti-corruption laws you want, you can regulate stocks and real estate all day long, but a stone heart will always find a workaround to build a new idol.
Exactly. So the stone heart is actually bondage. Replacing it with a heart of flesh is not turning them into robots. It is the restoration of true human freedom. Flesh is alive, it is responsive, it bleeds.
It can feel things.
Yes. It is capable of empathy, capable of feeling the weight of justice, and capable of genuine, dynamic relationship. A heart of flesh allows you to actually choose the good rather than being a slave to the bad. That's why the text follows this surgery with the covenant promise. You will be my people, and I will be your God.
Because you can't have a relationship with a rock.
Precisely. You cannot have a mutual relationship with a stone. You can only have it with living flesh. The Spirit of God doesn't override their humanity. It finally makes them fully human again.
Okay, so we have the causal chain here. The geography was defiled. The resulting exile created a global crisis for God's holy name. God acts to restore his reputation, but to ensure the fix is permanent, he performs this radical internal heart transplant on the people.
That's the sequence, yes.
So when you combine those two things, a restored landscape and a people with a brand new living operating system, what happens when they actually step foot back into this reality? The external world responds in a way that is utterly staggering.
Oh, it leads to an overwhelming, almost chaotic level of utopian abundance.
Yeah, the text describes a physical flourishing that defies logic. God says, he will call for the grain and make it plentiful. Famine is permanently eradicated. The ruined, desolate cities are rebuilt and heavily fortified. The population multiplies. And I just love the specific imagery used here. The text says the people will multiply like flocks for offerings at Jerusalem during her appointed festivals.
Which to an ancient reader is a very specific sensory-rich metaphor.
Right. What does that actually look like on the ground?
So during the major pilgrimage festivals like Passover, hundreds of thousands of people would converge on Jerusalem, bringing massive flocks of sheep for sacrifice.
Just a sea of animals.
Oh, a total sea. The noise, the bleeding, the sheer volume of life crowding the streets would be deafening. It was absolute joyful chaos. Ezekiel said that these ruined, silent, ghostly cities that were mocked by the surrounding nations are going to be so packed with human life that it will resemble the chaotic abundance of the highest festival day.
Wow. And the onlookers, the exact same nations that were trash-talking them earlier, are forced to declare this land that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. It is a total systemic reversal. But right in the middle of this perfect utopian vision, we get this bizarre, jarring emotional reaction from the Israelite.
It is perhaps the deepest psychological insight in the entire text.
The text says, "Then you will remember your evil ways and wicked deeds, and you will loathe yourselves for your sins and detestable practices." And God reiterates, "I want you to know that I'm not doing this for your sake. Be ashamed and disgraced for your conduct."
It's a shocking turn.
It really is. So how are we supposed to process this? I mean, you get a Garden of Eden, you get fortified cities, everything is absolutely perfect, your enemies are silenced, and your reaction is to loathe yourself. Shouldn't there be a massive parade? Shouldn't they be throwing a festival of triumph?
Well, if we look at this through our modern, hyper-individualistic lens, we would absolutely expect a parade. We'd expect them to write best-selling memoirs about how they manifested their success or how their resilience brought them back to the top. We expect them to take the credit.
Right. 10 habits of highly effective exiles.
Exactly. But Ezekiel unpacks a profound truth about unearned grace that is completely countercultural. Think about the reality of their situation. They are standing in the middle of overwhelming abundance, and they know with absolute certainty that they did nothing to earn it.
Yeah.
In fact, they know they're the exact people who caused the devastation in the first place. They were the ones who defiled the land with blood.
They burned the house down, and God just handed them the keys to a newly built mansion.
Exactly. And when you receive true unearned grace, when the universe hands you absolute goodness that you objectively do not deserve, it doesn't produce arrogance. It shouldn't produce a parade of self-congratulations. It produces profound, shattering humility. It produces a deep, piercing awareness of your own past failures.
Oh, wow. So this shame isn't like a punishment from God to keep them miserable in paradise.
Not at all. This shame or self-loathing is actually the ultimate proof that the heart of flesh is functioning perfectly.
Wait, how does feeling shame prove your heart is working?
Because a heart of stone never feels shame. A heart of stone justifies its actions. A heart of stone looks at the ruin it caused and says, well, the circumstances were tough. I had to do what I had to do to survive. It wasn't my fault.
Deflecting the blame entirely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But a heart of flesh feels the appropriate heavy weight of history. When they see the unmerited, breathtaking goodness of God, the contrast between His holiness and their past corruption is so stark that they can't help but feel a deep, mournful regret for what they had done.
That makes a lot of sense.
This healthy, humbling shame is the exact psychological mechanism that ensures they never repeat the cycle. They will never take the Garden of Eden for granted again because they know exactly the kind of destruction they are capable of without that new spirit guiding them.
That completely reframes the concept of shame. It's not a toxic emotion designed to crush them. It's a grounding mechanism designed to keep them tethered to reality. It takes the ego completely out of the equation of success.
It anchors their new society in gratitude rather than entitlement. Entitlement destroys systems. Gratitude sustains them.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today. We have traced an epic, sweeping journey through Ezekiel 36. We started with defiled, mocked mountains, looking at a physical landscape that literally vomited out its inhabitants because of their violence and corruption across all sectors of society.
Yeah, total collapse.
We saw how that failure created a global crisis that only a sovereign God could fix, driven not by human merit, but entirely by a desire to vindicate His own holy name before a watching world.
And we saw the vital mechanics of that fix. It required an internal upgrade, a radical transplant, moving humanity from a stubborn, dead heart of stone to a living, responsive heart of flesh.
And I want to connect this directly back to you, the listener, because So often when we look at the broken systems in our own lives, whether it's our interpersonal dynamics, our careers, or the broader communities we inhabit, we inherently believe the fix is external. We think if we just get a better job or move to a new city or change the people around us, the ruins will magically be rebuilt.
We constantly look for that external
Yeah,
source sheet.
but this ancient text challenges that assumption at its very core. It reminds you that sometimes the fixes we desperately need aren't just about changing our surroundings, they require a fundamental shift in our internal operating system. You cannot sustain a metaphorical Garden of Eden if you are still operating with a heart of stone. It will just end in ruins again.
The internal must precede the external.
It has to. Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with today, something to mull over long after this discussion is done. We've talked a lot about the paradox of feeling shame in the midst of unearned grace. It makes me wonder about our cultural obsession with forgetting the past and, just moving on. What if the goal isn't to erase the memory of our worst mistakes? Think about the greatest turnarounds or successes you've witnessed or experienced. How often do we assume the reward is based on human merit, when in reality, we might just be the beneficiaries of a much larger narrative of grace?
That's a powerful thought.
What if the very memory of our most devastating failures and the humbling shame that accompanies them is actually the only thing that qualifies us to handle true, lasting success? Without the memory of the ruin, how long would it take us to burn the new garden down?
That really changes how we view every failure we've ever had.
It really does. Thanks for diving deck with us today. We'll see you next time.